This week on the show, we have DragonflyBSD's Hammer encrypted master-slave setup for you. We tell you of our second part of the BSDCan recap that we have. NomadBSD 1.1 RC1 is available. OpenBSD adds an LDAP client to its base system. FreeBSD with pNFS support now in head. Intel FPU Speculation Vulnerability has been confirmed, and what some Unix command names mean in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 251, Crypto Hammer. Recorded on June 20th, 2018. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Glad to have you with us this week. We have cool headlines and a packed show for you, starting off with DragonflyBSD towards a Hammer 1 master-slave encrypted setup with LUKS, L-U-K-S. So we found this on it, and this is exciting for people who have yet to use Hammer in a proper way, or in an encrypted way even. So this is in our DragonflyBSD. So what's this all about?
Right. So if you weren't aware, one of the point of Hammer FS is more to actually be a distributed file system to exist across multiple machines. And that's how, it's not, well, it has some features that are somewhat related to ZFS. Hammer's goal is really to do other things. And so this setup talks about actually having a master-slave setup with Hammer FS and then using the dencrypt setup to actually have the partitions be encrypted. They say, I want to share my experience setting up Dragonfly in a master-slave setup. So after a long time using a Synology NAS for NFS, I decided it was time to rethink this setup because it had a couple of issues. First, you can't run NFS on top of encrypted partitions very easily. I suspected having some data corruption due to bit rot on the ext4 file system used in the Synology, and the network card was stuck at 100 megabits instead of a gigabit, even after swapping the cables and switches and a bunch of other stuff. So, that's unacceptably bad performance. And, a Synology is proprietary, and even the bits that aren't are Linux. So you probably don't want that. So they say, I've been playing with Dragonfly in the past and knew about Hammer FS. So it was a perfect excuse to actually try the setup. So they KLD load DM, which is the LUKS compatible crypto layer on Dragonfly. Set up the crypto, basically format the disk and then open it with their key, create a new Hammer FS file system on it, and then format and set up a second drive, and set up the slave there.
I like the name they chose, by the way, Fort Knox.
Yeah. Then they mounted the drives, and ran the Hammer pFS status command and took a look at it. They linked the slave to the master and got the mirror stream going. And they say after that, setting up NFS is fairly trivial. After you get over the syntax of etc exports. And they said the few problems they had were being able to unlock LUKS partitions at boot time. But they said that's an acceptable trade-off, adding that, LUKS gives much better security than the old Synology setup. And that sleeping doesn't really work, but you probably don't want your NAS to be sleeping anyway. They say, in the end, overall, I'm happy with Hammer FS1 and using that on Dragonfly, and they said it's a neat Unix and a community is very friendly. He said even Matthew Dillon provided him with a kernel patch to fix a broken ACPI problem he was having on his machine. And they promised to post a follow-up in 6 months once they've been using it for a while.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward with a couple of commands. You get your encrypted setup, and even in master slave, that's pretty interesting. So yeah, definitely more Dragonfly people should try this out or adapt it to other BSDs, because I think some of the setup could also be done without Hammer.
Well, there's not many other file systems that would exist across two separate machines. You could use something like hast on FreeBSD to have a block device that exists across two machines and then put whatever file system you want on top, but that's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, this is Hammer's specialty.
Yep.
Okay. So
now, as we promised, we shall talk more about BSDCan, which is going on almost 2 weeks ago now.
Yeah. So remember last
it's been that long. But then again, it's been so busy getting caught up after it that it does seem like it's been a while already.
And remember last week we only covered the first 2 days, the tutorials and Dev Summit, which already had enough material. But this episode has the actual conference, the 2 days that followed those two. And yeah, basically it was a nice conference overall. And the nice thing for us is basically, since we were at the Dev Summit already, this smoothly went into the actual conference itself, because after the first the morning session and in the afternoon there are some working groups, and after those there's typically the registration desk at the Red Lion for the second year now, because of the number of people that show up. They needed a bigger space, and so we went there and picked up our registration stuff quickly. We couldn't spend much time there because we had to get back because the newcomers orientation and mentorship session was there, led by Michael W. Lucas, which he's done for the third time, I think, now?
I think this is the third time.
So what's the session about? This is basically a session before the actual conference where a lot more people arrive just for seeing the talks. And this one is basically intended for people who have never been to BSDCan or never been to any BSD conference and might have some questions. What's this all about? How does this go?
Not just that, but also it helps if you know a couple of people by name at the conference and know who to talk to and who's willing to have random people walk up to them and ask them questions and so on. But yeah, it was interesting. I heard from a couple of people that were at the Dev Summit or the tutorials where like, I could have used this first timers talk on Tuesday night instead of Thursday night.
Yeah, for the Dev Summit itself. Yeah. Maybe we can move this around for next year. That's a good feedback. So,
I think it makes most sense to have it on Thursday, but maybe we just have a second version of it on Tuesday. It'd be a lot fewer people on the Tuesday, so maybe it's just like, hey, if you don't know where you are or what you're doing, meet here, and then we'll go have gelato or something.
Yeah. So yeah, Michael explained the 6-2-1 rule to everyone, which was new to me. I think he added that. So what's the 6-2-1 rule? It basically defines that you should have at least 6 hours of sleep, 2 meals per day.
2 real meals.
Real meal. Yeah, not just
snacking on whatever is left over at the conference or whatever.
Yeah. And the 1 stands for the number of showers that attendees should have at a minimum. So
with soap.
But that's a must to have a nice conference for everyone. It's and the hours of sleep, of course, is of importance because you want to be fresh and not just nodding off on your computer screen.
Especially if you've been going to sessions since Wednesday.
It can be a bit. You can be a bit sleep deprived by the time.
I was out less late than previous years, but still too late on Tuesday and Wednesday. Not so much Thursday.
Yeah. So it's a good rule: 6-1 hours of sleep, meals per day, and number of showers. So, and he also explained the partners program, because there is a partners program led by his wife Liz. They basically go around town and see museums or other sightseeing.
They did a science museum. They did the art gallery, the Royal Canadian Mint, where they make the coins and gold bars and so on. It's especially interesting in Canada because Canada is the standard. Literally, Canada is the gold standard for the purity of gold.
Okay. I guess they don't get many samples to try out at home, but at least it's
no. But there's a
something
big one you can actually try to lift.
Oh, okay. And if you can lift that, you can keep it, or
no?
Okay.
I think there's
so that's
pictures from last year of Michael Lucas trying to take it home and what happened to him.
Well, it's like pulling the sword out of the stone.
It's not
and
quite that
so this intended for the people like partners who are not too interested in the actual conference or the Dev Summit.
But partners, widows, widowers, orphans, all the other people that want to come with you when you travel to Canada, but don't necessarily want to go to the conference.
Yeah. And I hear people saying, oh, they had such a good time. Maybe next year I sneak out of the conference and attend their little gathering.
When they had lunch at Coco's 77 or Coco 70 or whatever it's called, which is like a chocolate cafe. And I was like, okay, you went without me. That makes me sad.
Unforgivable. Yeah.
I cannot be in all the places at once. This is so unfair.
Yeah. Okay. So, but if you're considering next year's BSDCan and you're like, yeah, well, I don't know whether I should bring my girlfriend, significant other, or whoever. Yes, bring them. They will not be bored.
Importantly, if it's more, they won't let me go if I don't bring them, and they'll be bored. I'm like, no, they won't be bored. It'll be fine. Yeah,
it's something for everyone.
Yeah, we kind of proved that with when we had BSDCan in Malta and then Paris. Both times, all of a sudden, there were a lot more people showing up that wouldn't have normally showed up. And it was because suddenly they could get permission. Talk to certain people and like, yeah, my wife's like, you're going to leave me alone with the kids for like a week and go to this conference? That's crazy.
Yeah, you have all the fun.
In Paris, they're like, so I called my mom. She's going to take care of the kids and we can go off to Paris.
Yes, that's how it's done. And yeah, so Michael basically explained some of the things. Maybe I have some. We could get the slides somewhere, maybe in the future. So and then afterwards, since we hadn't had dinner yet, a couple of them went to a shawarma place. I went with Michael Lucas, and some of the newbies followed along because basically they were new to town anyway. So that was a good way of getting to know each other a bit better.
Yes, luckily, once you get into the Byward Market, you just pick a place and go eat. It's fine. But it's nice not to be alone in the strange city. So,
yeah. So that was the day before. The very first conference day is happening next. That was traditionally opened by Dan Langell, showing the statistics that we mentioned last year. Yeah, the statistics from last year that we mentioned last week. So that pretty much said the same number of attendees.
BSDCan 2018 broke the record for having the most people. It was 0 people bigger than last year.
Yeah, so it's not a decline, and I guess that's a good number of people to handle. And I think this one had especially a lot more new people here.
Yes, I think the number of people that were there for the first time was definitely higher. I know at the Dev Summit, the number of people that were new or were invited and weren't FreeBSD committers was very high, which is good.
Yeah. So, and then Benno Rice gave the keynote talking about the tragedy of systemd, which was a good mixture of hilarity and also serious talk because, a lot of people, when they hear systemd, it's like, the tragedy or the disaster. But Benno also had a good point, or a couple of good points, looking at what systemd is, what the ideas behind were, even though the implementation might be a bit different than what people were expecting. But some of the intentions are good, and that's what he focused it on. And we shouldn't be too judgmental just by hearing all the crazy talk about systemd. That doesn't mean that we will implement it anytime soon, but at least we can get some ideas from that one and integrate it in our own kind of system. And then here follows my list of talks. So I was also in the automating network infrastructures with Ansible on FreeBSD afterwards. So that was in the Dev Summit track. And that was a good talk because I I was also interested in the Ansible parts in that, especially since I gave my tutorials or the tutorial about Ansible 2 days before that, and I saw some people from the tutorial in that talk as well. So I guess they did the same, like me, did everything that's Ansible like they want to know about, and that was certainly a good presentation. We also had a couple of questions from the audience and back and forth, so that was good. The next one was all along the D-Watchtower. Devin Teskey delivered a well-prepared talk, in my opinion. So at first I thought, oh, wow, 100 slides, that's a lot, and that doesn't fit into a 90-minute, or is it not? No, 45 minutes even. 45-minute time slot with questions. And I thought, ooh, that's tough. But the slides were pretty much just not filled with too much text, and that flowed quickly through the material without, quickly going through it and making people confused. So that was a great one, and also has a great demo at the end that showed what dtrace in combination with her own dwatch improvements could do. And the visualizations were pretty nice to see. And of course, there were also questions. So it seems like dtrace is a tool that dwatch is making it much easier to use for people to just get into without having to learn the dtrace specifics or the syntax. And then dwatch can be used to demonstrate certain things. And then you can use that once you're interested in that. Then you can use dtrace to go into a even more deeper level and looking at the things that interest you.
A lot of times it's a matter of getting it in and showing what you can do and making it not too complicated, that then eventually leads to you digging in and getting more. It's like the conversation we're having on the IRC right now is, FreeNAS gets lots of people using FreeBSD and ZFS, but importantly, a portion of those people will eventually dig deeper and get into actually doing FreeBSD stuff underneath.
Yep. And then I grabbed food, which caused me to be a bit late.
While you were at the DWatch talk, I was in the other room where Rod Grimes was talking about improvements to ZFS send and receive by basically passing a file descriptor to a socket opened by the ZFS command instead of doing ZFS send pipe something else. So that was interesting. We had quite a bit of discussion about it. There was some concern about having the ZFS receive command open up a port and listen because invalid data sent in there could cause it to crash or something. So we talked about reversing it and making it so that the receiver connects to the sender so that if somebody randomly connects to the port or whatever on the sender, all they're going to do is get blasted with a stream of ZFS. Because it's unidirectional, they won't be able to send something back that will cause ZFS to crash or something.
Yeah, that particular day had a full track ZFS only. So in that one room, there was ZFS from the morning till the evening. So that was cool. As I said, I grabbed food, which made me go to the ZFS BOF a little bit late. So they were all already into it when I joined that one. That was led by Alan and Matt Ahrens. So I only caught a couple of last questions. But overall, what were the questions about? The usage or features?
We had a couple of questions. Matt started off with just a quick overview of all the things that have recently landed in ZFS, what other stuff is coming pretty soon, what stuff is in the works, and other ideas and that type of thing. We answered a bunch of questions about deduplication, in particular, streaming deduplication. So if you don't have dedupe on your machine, you can ZFS send a stream and turn on deduping of the send stream.
Yep.
So it will create the dedupe table in user space rather than the kernel and basically keep track of every block as it replicates it. And if it ever encounters a block that it could dedupe, in the replication stream, it just says, hey, refer to this object I already sent you earlier. So on neither end, you end up with the dedupe tax of impacting the performance of your system. But what you replicate across the wire does get deduped.
That's could result into a much more space savings.
So if you have well, it doesn't save any space, but you
the overall
data
transport
across the network possibly.
Yeah.
So if you have very dedupable data, and you're not using dedupe, you can still get the advantage over the network. Although remember, your ZFS send command is going to take a lot of RAM to do that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting.
And looking at the questions that people asked, it seems like people are now using more advanced features in ZFS and not just ask, hey, how do I create a pool, or I don't know, some easy things. So they're using ZFS extensively, at least the people.
There are a lot fewer questions about, do I have to have a number of drives as a power of 2, and more, I'm replicating this way, and how do I optimize it, and so on. So yes, I would say the level of the questions has gotten a lot higher at the ZFS BOFs over the last couple of years that I've been doing them.
Okay, so that catches on. And my next talk was SSH Key Management by Michael Lucas. It was an excerpt from his SSH Mastery, the 2nd edition, but this is a new part, a new chapter that he wrote for that one, covering all kinds of, how to do key management in a big university or a big company, how do you create your own certificate authority with SSH. So that was new to me, definitely, because I was reading the book, but I didn't get to that chapter yet. So, but that kind of whet my appetite for this particular topic. And it was well presented as well from Michael Lucas. As always, if you know how his presentations go, he's also interacting a lot with the audience and, drop some names sometimes, Peter Wem was in there, had to leave out for the power outage issue for a while, but then came back. And, that was a good session. I hope it will come out on YouTube soon when the recordings are available. So that's definitely worth watching. Did you go to any of the talks in that time slot after lunch, or?
Actually, no. I got sidetracked in the hallway and didn't make it to a talk.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah,
I was torn between going to talks and staying at the foundation table for a while, but it's difficult to be in all the places at once. Yeah,
and I'd already seen Sam's talk and Brooks' talk at BSDCan and Taiwan BSDCan previously. So there was that. But yes, there were 2 more talks I could have gone to and would have been interested in, but I didn't get very much time for my lunch during the BOF, and after I was out in the hall talking to people and never actually made it anywhere.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I used the time to go and get the interview room we had booked and set it up.
Yeah, that leads into our next segment. So my part is so I didn't go to any talks after that one.
Okay, I did. So I can talk a little bit about that. I did Warner Lush's DevMatch talk, which is talking about using the PCI plug-and-play information so that we can take the generic kernel in FreeBSD and make it quite a bit smaller. He actually had some graphs showing how the kernel has grown over time with the different versions and the different compilers. And this would basically let us get the 12 kernel back towards the size of the 7 kernel, which would be a big shrink, by basically having more of the drivers not be on by default, but be as loadable modules, because DevMatch would auto-load the correct modules.
Yeah, and on demand.
The main reason, like right now, we compile almost every storage controller into the kernel because, you need storage in order to boot. And, if every user has to, edit their loader.conf and add the driver for their storage controller, that's not very fun. But if DevMatch can automatically load the drivers for all the devices on your system, it means generic gets smaller. You only have the drivers for stuff you need loaded. It reduces attack surface and other things as well. But in general, it'd be a big improvement. So we talked a bit about that, how some of the work went, how is Google Summer of Code student is doing on applying this to the hundreds of drivers that are built into the base, and also some of the shortcomings this has when it comes to platforms like ARM that don't necessarily have a bus where you can just enumerate what additional devices are plugged in.
Yep. And all these add up to a much more smaller kernel footprint in the actual memory, because the kernel is always resident in memory, and the smaller the kernel, the more memory you have.
Yeah.
Among other benefits.
And then after that, we actually got pulled out of, instead of going to the last talk, we kidnapped Kirk and locked him in a room on the 4th floor and made him talk to us until we had to pack up and run to our core meeting.
Yeah, so there were a couple of meetings around the conferences because they make use of the conference space and that the fact that people are actually in one place to talk.
Yeah, it's the one time a year where all of us are in one place. It's the most well-attended conference in that regard. And so I guess you had foundation meeting, FreeBSD journal meetings. We had the core team meeting. There were a bunch of other meetings.
Yeah. And so these are behind the scenes, more or less, but nevertheless important for getting some of the things working that are either announced later or just keep up with what's new or what people are working on or coordinating things.
Get all the people in the room for an hour, you get a lot more done than you would over email or even teleconference.
Yep.
That is having 4 or 5 people be active in the discussion at once when we were talking about the SSL certificate thing. If we tried to do that on Google Hangout, it would have taken twice as long because we would have had to stop and try a lot harder not to talk over top of each other. Whereas in person, it was with the no latency and clearer audio, it was much easier to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good way of getting something done, or at least coordinated so far that people can go ahead on their own.
Yep. So we interviewed Kirk in the video that we used yesterday. If you happened to watch the FreeBSD Day live stream, you probably have caught that, although it was only about 1 of the 6 hours of content in there, so maybe you didn't. I think we'll cheat and stick that in a BSD Now episode coming up soon. I think we have one of those weeks where we have to record ahead soon, so we will.
We'll have an interview for you
with that great interview we did with Kirk. But the FreeBSD Day live stream, I'm going to leave that up for at least a month or so. But we'll talk more about that later in the show. On to day 2 of the conference.
Yep. So I basically spent most of the time in the room that had all the ZFS talks. The first one was, of course, Matt Ahrens about flexible disk usage in OpenZFS, talking about the features he's implementing to expand the RAID Z with single disk.
First, the one that's already in 12 now, which is device removal, allowing you to take individual devices or mirror sets out of a pool to shrink a pool. But I don't know who would ever need less space.
Yeah, it's unlikely.
There are a couple times where it's useful, and it's an interesting feature. Yeah, and then the second half of that is the RAID Z expansion work, where you'll be able to take, say, an array of 6 disks in a RAID Z1 or Z2 and expand it to 7 disks and get additional storage.
Yeah, that was interesting to see how they implemented that and, moving the data around to balance it again and things like that, so that if you are evacuating a device, that all the data is off that device if you pull it out of the pool.
Yeah, and just the way that the blocks get reflowed, kind of like just changing the width of a column in a Word editor, a document editing software. You're doing 2 columns or whatever. You just widen one of the columns, and the whole paragraph shifts up as each sentence gets wider, and you get your word wrap going on or whatever. It's interesting to watch that happen on a hard drive.
Yeah, as a live thing. Yep. Yeah, so that went well. It went a bit longer, so you had to start quickly your Z standard talk after that.
Actually, no, I had quite a bit of
time. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a
your
15-minute
laptop.
break, and I stood around waiting for 15 minutes. So.
Well, your laptop was tested with the HDMI connector, so that was easy to get started.
I was running FreeBSD, so it just worked. All the people with Macs were having trouble.
Okay, yeah, well, we take that bullet. And so that talk was basically the same you gave at Asia BSDCon, or is that an extended talk?
A bunch of things have changed since then, but it was somewhat related, yes. It was a derivative of it, basically.
Yeah.
It's like
so
everything I said in Tokyo, plus a bunch of new developments, including, I don't think I had run into the L2 ARC problem yet in Tokyo. And some of the other bits came out of discussions that happened in April at the ZFS user conference. So obviously that hadn't happened yet when I presented this in Tokyo.
Yeah, so that was the latest talk about the Z standard in OpenZFS, which we're looking forward to. No pressure here. Yeah, it takes its time, and I like especially the story that you had around it, where you said, oh, it wasn't just easy to do. It had also some bumpy parts where you didn't find the information that you were looking for, or who can help me with that, or
I ran into a bug, but it turns out the bug was fixed like 3 hours after I downloaded it, but I didn't run into it for 2 days, and so if I had just updated a bit later or updated again the next day, I would have never encountered this bug, and I wouldn't have wasted 2 days trying to figure out what was broken.
Yeah, that happens. But yeah, it's in a good path towards completion.
Yeah, I encountered something similar to that last week. Spent like 3 days trying to figure out why QEMU wouldn't boot properly with UEFI. And it turned out it was because I didn't give it enough memory. I was like scraggling through the boot code trying to figure out what was wrong, and turned out that was not the case.
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, that went over well, and that was then when that was the morning part, and then the lunch sessions had also all kinds of birds of a feather sessions.
Mm-hmm. And then in the afternoon, I had a bunch of different talks. I went to Calvin Hendricks Parker's talk about replacing traditional backup systems with ZFS.
Oh yeah, I went to a late lunch outside, so I didn't get to that one.
Right. I was a bit late to Calvin's talk as well. I snuck in from the back because I was talking with Matt Ahrens over our late lunch out in the hall.
Yeah, the lunch crowd had a long line, and people tried to get food.
Yeah, I know for most of the BOSS, we waited about 15 minutes to let people get through the lunch line and get to a BOSS. Yeah, if there's still a big line for lunch, let's not start yet and let people get their food and come sit down, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
And then later in the day, we had, there was preparing your home router for the future, running Linux apps on FreeBSD, RDMA over converged Ethernet, and zREPL.
Oh yeah, I went to that one because I was sharing the room at the university with Christian, and we flew over to Canada. It was his first time, so I showed him around a bit, so I had to be there.
I was there because Matt Ahrens and I were both interested in a bunch of the work he's doing. zREPL itself is of some interest, but more some of the changes to ZFS that, back in 2015, when I was trying to update my ZFS replication tool, I decided that as a hackathon project, it'd be good to build a subcommand into ZFS that told you about the changes to the ZFS command. Kind of like how we have feature flags for the on-disk format and feature flags for the send-receive format. We need something like that for the command line. As the command lines matured, it grew, say, the option to set more than one property at once. Well, if your script, there's a performance improvement in doing multiple properties in one go instead of each one separately. But your script has to know whether your version of ZFS supports that or not before it tries to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Or even just figuring out, hey, does the machine on the other side even support that property? And, depending on what version you have, ZFS send the verbose no-op version prints it to standard out instead of standard error or the other way around. And again, if you're going to capture that data in order to create a progress bar, you have to know which file descriptor read it from. And
otherwise it's not progressing.
So in the latter half of his talk, and also discussions we had over other times with me and Matt Aarons and Sarah Harsey and Christian, were how do we build that, and so on. And so that was why I was in that talk, as I was very interested in talking about some of the other things he wants to do, and how, especially if he can take my old project from 2015 and finish it, that'd be great.
Yep. So that's going, and he's talking about, I talked to him afterwards, and he's planning to go to the ZFS Developer Summit. So that's good development there.
Although apparently his exams are spread out across that period, and he doesn't want to fly home and do the exam with jet lag. And I'm like,
that's understandable.
We'll do this way. And then he's like, well, I don't want to go to San Francisco just for a couple days and then come back. I want to stay and do touristy stuff. I'm like, well, just come back in October for Meet BSD and do the touristy stuff then.
There will be a couple of options. So it's difficult as a student, but there will be ways to
but hopefully we will see him at the ZFS Developer Summit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that will be.
Maybe he'll even have done some work by then. So I don't have to.
Get even
the more work
exposure
he does,
to
the less I have to do, which is very helpful. Or more, the faster it gets done, which is more important. It's not that I don't want to do work. It's just that work is rather far down my to-do list, and I'd rather it get done sooner.
Yeah, if someone else is already working in that area, that's makes sense to hand that over. And after that one, I stayed in that room because then Kirk McCusey gave his Evolution of FreeBSD Governance talk.
Yes, and I had a good seat and wanted to keep it for the auction.
Yeah, so that people can see you when you raise your hand. But that was a good talk. If you've ever heard Kirk speak, that's just great. I mean, the topic
he also
itself
passed around a pamphlet from the University of California at Berkeley. It was like the 6 greatest inventions ever come out of Berkeley, and I think was it number 4 was, hey, this BSD OS thing.
Yeah, so they recognized that, and among other achievements, that was listed, and then it went into detailing how some of the early days started off, like how do we manage this project, who's in charge, and how do we deal with conflicts that might flare up at some point. How
we evolve that over time and make sure that it's more than one person in charge, and that we can successfully change the group of people that's in charge. And as he noted, we have the core election every 2 years, and that slowly shifts who's in charge. There have been basically in different eras of BSD, right? You had kind of like the early era of Jordan and PHK and Rod Grimes and so on, and then you had the later era with Watson and so on, and then now you have the current era, and then soon we'll have yet another era.
Yeah, the voting period is over. The results aren't there yet, but we'll keep that for the future episodes for you. That was good to, and he also iterated on that this is an ongoing process and the community needs fresh blood infused. Otherwise, we just grow old and, die out as like the dinosaurs.
Yeah, and so he had his graph of committer ages. Because it's interesting, we should get Christian a commit bit, and he can drag that slightly lower.
Yeah, so the medium age of the FreeBSD developer community doesn't move to being older. The more people we get in there, the more likely it is that we shift this or keep this at a certain age.
Yes, I guess so far we've actually managed to keep the average under 40, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm still within that age group.
Kirk said if you drop the 5 oldest people, then the average shifts down to like 37.
Yeah, even better statistics. Yep. Okay, that was fun. And then the closing session already started. Oh, the conference is over so quickly. But closing session means auction. And that was also a funny thing because people had all kinds of funny things to auction off.
Well, what's funny is that the epicness of this auction has spread outside of just BSDCan now. So the catering people heard about this. So a couple of years ago, they were cleaning up, Dan managed to rescue the last cookie from the tea time at like 2 o'clock. And so at 5 o'clock, he auctioned off the last cookie. It was like a chocolate chip. And I don't know, I think somebody paid like $30 for it because the money goes to charity. But then Dan, being Dan, produced the second to last cookie and proceeded to auction it off. And that was pretty amusing. But if it somehow, and that's continued last couple of years now, and now somehow the catering people heard about this. And so one of the nice ladies made a special last cookie of BSDCan. It was about this big.
Yeah, not your typical cookie size.
It was like the entire size of the tray that it goes in. And so Dan told a little story about it and held up this cookie. And I was like, bid.
Well, I want that.
Yes. I paid $60 for the cookie. It was really good.
The last
It took me a week to eat the whole cookie, but it was good. It stayed remarkably fresh as well. The container they put it in was very nice. But it fueled the ride home all day on the following Sunday, and I just kind of took chunks out of it.
Yeah, that's a snack for the road.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they had the second to last cookie again.
Yes.
Same size. And that also went to the auction.
But it wasn't the last cookie. I got the last cookie.
Yeah, second to last and last.
Oh, yes. And then Henning was a good sport again. So Michael Lucas donated a T-shirt in a shiny bag. And eventually we managed to get the bidding high enough to get Henning to wear this shirt without getting to look at it first.
Yeah.
Actually, I think a bunch of people pooled their bids together in order to make the biggest possible bid, which I think they, in total, they bid over a total of over $700 and something.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then there's Henning walking around for the rest of the night with his I Love Systemd t-shirt on. And people could donate an additional $10, I think it was, to get their picture taken.
With the cat on high tails. Yep. Yeah, that is certainly a fun way of ending the conference and having a good laugh for a good cause.
Yep.
And yeah, we want to thank everyone that made BSDCan happen, especially Dan Langell, organizing this year after year, getting better each time.
This is what, 15th year?
Yeah, it's just amazing to see how it's done and everything works. Everything is there. Catering works. Talks are there. And
yeah, well, it's just like thinking of I'm getting close to my 5th year of BSD Now, and if you count the other podcasts, I did like 5 years before that. But Dan's been doing the conference for 15 years. That's a long time.
And not just that, there's also PGCon before or after that. If you're already tired after organizing one conference, you think twice of doing another one the next week.
It's slightly interesting. He seems to flip-flop back and forth between the idea of do them in consecutive weeks and get it over with, or take a month off in between.
Yeah.
So BSDCan will be back in May next year, but PGCon I don't think is going to move, and so there will be a bunch of time between them. Instead of them being back-to-back like they were this year.
Definitely, yeah. So don't plan anything for May in 2019 because that's BSDCan.
The official dates were tweeted many times with pictures and so on. So you don't have to take the whole month off. You just need 6 or so days.
Yeah. So we should hopefully meet you there next year.
Yep. Wow. That took even longer than I
Yeah,
thought.
it's
Okay.
as much time as
this week's extremely long episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and check it out. If you've never used DigitalOcean before, go to do.co/BSDNow, and you'll end up at a super secret URL that lets you sign up and get $100 credit for 2 months. And you can try as many droplets as you want during that time. Or if you already have an account but haven't used a coupon code before, go into your account and add the coupon code FreeBSD now, and an extra $10 will be added to your account. And that one doesn't expire. You get to use that $10 over however long you need. And since you can get a 1 gigabyte of RAM, 1 CPU VM with a terabyte of transfer for only $5 a month, it might take you 2 months to use up that $10 credit.
Yeah. And all these machines come with free monitoring attached to it. You don't have to pay for that. So you can say, oh, what's my current CPU usage, or how much bandwidth am I currently using? And you can set up alerts in case your VM is just chugging along nicely for months and you want to say, in case something spikes in the CPU usage or in the traffic or some other metric, then I want to get alerted. And you can set up alerts on the DigitalOcean website in your management interface, and that will alert you if something is out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and they also have load balancing, so you can load balance across multiple of these VMs so that you can say have one running 24/7 and the other one only spool up on an hourly price when your website gets busy or whatever. And they have floating IPs, so if instead of doing in-place upgrades, you like to do green-blue, where you set up the new one, get it working, flip the traffic over, and only once it's confirmed, get rid of the old version, you can do that as well. Plus, with private networking, you can have a separate database instance with multiple front ends, and all that traffic is on a private network and also doesn't count against your beefy quota you already get. And with their new $15 a month size droplet, you can choose between 1, 2, and 3 gigs of RAM, 1, 2, and 3 CPUs, and pick the right balance for you. Do you want lots of RAM and not a lot of CPU, a little bit of both, or not as much RAM but lots of CPUs?
Yep. It also provides you with integrations into your automation software like Chef, Ansible, Puppet. There are modules there to just spin up VMs.
It has the client data support, so you just feed it the little script. You can pick FreeBSD 11.1, and 11.2 will be available very soon. You can choose it with UFS or ZFS, and you can just feed it a little script, and it will start running commands during first boot. It will apply your Puppet manifest or your Ansible playbook or whatever, and the VM comes up in under a minute, and then it'll apply your changes, and you'll have a perfectly customized FreeBSD machine up in literally no time.
Yep. And that's the beauty of it. You have all these kinds of integrations, and you can integrate it into your, you can get Slack notifications, for example, in case you are using that and want to get notified about certain states. And they have a great community, so you can find a couple of tutorials that you always wanted to try out on your DigitalOcean machine. And in case you tried it and you say, it's okay, I tried it, but it's not my thing, then you just delete the VM and it doesn't cost you any more money.
Yeah, the $5 a month one is 0.7 cents per hour.
And it's already a good
You can run that
machine
for a while, and it's not going to add up to any money.
Yep. So yeah, try them out and use those coupon codes that Alan mentioned so that you can start off on our little bill here, unless you like it, and then add your credit card if you want to keep this running.
So next up, we have a story about NomadBSD 1.1.
Yeah, they seem to be starting their, they're in their release candidate 1 period in the development at this point. Mm-hmm. So, but they also list a couple of things that are new. The first and hopefully final release candidate of NomadBSD. This is NomadBSD 1.1, and that can be now downloaded from their website. And they have a couple of changes listed there already, which are interesting for people.
Yeah. So if you don't know what NomadBSD is, it's basically a a live BSD system on a USB stick. So it allows you to basically have a little BSD desktop you can carry around in your pocket and plug into any computer, boot it up, and have your BSD desktop and use it that way.
Yeah, if you're laptop shopping, for example, you want to see whether everything is supported, whether sound is working or stuff, bring that to your vendor and ask them, hey, can I test my little system here? I just boot this from the USB stick.
Yeah, and it's got bundled in support for the Intel GPU stuff. Basically, it auto installs the DRM next kmod package. Has support for a nice package manager. They have DSP display settings, the exec and SU. It has Thunderbird, Mosh, Nmap, DD Rescue, and a bunch of Xterm, all that kind of stuff bundled by default. So you have a nice usable machine right out of the box.
Yeah, well, very cool. That sounds like a good refresh for a new version. Bunch of new software available.
Yep.
So, time for news roundup. This week we have an LDAP client added to current. That's OpenBSD current. And
so Rick Fleuter committed his simple LDAP client to the OpenBSD based system.
Yep. If you think, well, isn't that already overdue? Yes, OpenBSD had for a while already the server and the YP LDAP in base. So it makes sense to have a simple LDAP client without depending on the Open LDAP package from ports. So that's good to have in the base system.
And in particular, it means you can use it with the authorized keys command script. So basically, when you SSH to the server, you can have it use the LDAP client to talk to the LDAP server and be like, hey, give me all the authorized keys out of the database for this user. And it will. Yep. And then it can authenticate users against those. So this way you can have one central LDAP server that has everybody's SSH keys, and they can log into any of the machines they're allowed to, all controlled by LDAP. And it's OpenBSD, so of course there's a full man page that describes how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice. That's a good whole package for LDAP folks.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the SSH integration. That's nice to have, because a couple of big companies, I saw that in the talk in SSH certificate authority. You can basically, load up your key into your LDAP profile, and there you can pull it down again when authorizing against. Of course, if your LDAP server is down, then you have a much bigger problem, because then you cannot log in again. But in general, for big installations and big companies, that's a good solution to have. So yeah, great to see that in OpenBSD. And another story that we have this week is the infamous Intel FPU Speculation Vulnerability has been confirmed now. So people have been rumoring about this, but it's official now. There is another CPU bug, at least in FPU this time.
In OpenBSD, Philip Gontier had committed a change to do proactive rather than lazy FPU switching. He committed that July 5th. Then later, during the second day of BSDCan, or the second day of talks at BSDCan, Theodorat had a discussion about it. And then using information disclosed in Theo's talk, Colin Percival from FreeBSD developed a proof of concept exploit in about 5 hours after lunch there. So I'm guessing Colin didn't see any more talks for the rest of the day. He just
didn't have much lunch.
Writing. And he sent that off to Intel, and that the fact that there was now a usable exploit, that caused Intel to make the official announcement about the vulnerability early.
Yeah, because there was already exploit code going on.
So on the 13th, instead of, I think the plan was the end of the month, I don't actually know, Intel released the details of the vulnerability. We also have a link here to Colin's tweet stream about it where he talked about how he wrote the exploit and how he told Intel about it and so on. And then you can see there's also FreeBSD's commit to mitigate the same vulnerability. What's interesting is the FreeBSD commit also includes a link to the FreeBSD mailing list from March of 2015, so more than 3 years ago, where there was actually a suggestion of making that same change for performance reasons. And it's interesting, a couple of other smaller OSs, like I think, I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Anyway, a couple of other small OSs have actually didn't have this vulnerability because they've been doing it the other way because it's faster anyway. And it's interesting that had people spent a little bit more time on it, this might have been fixed in FreeBSD in 2015.
Yeah, coming from a different angle.
Yeah. But, you know, there's always a risk of making a change like this, that it's actually, well, it's faster on these machines, it's not faster on those machines, and so on. Or, you know, they might introduce a subtle bug that'll be really hard to figure out. And so sometimes these changes are not made without a really good reason. And then Intel went and gave us a really good reason
to actually pay more attention to that particular part of the implementation. Yeah, so this is security, this is serious, and if there are patches available for your system, then you should apply them sooner rather than later.
Yep. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and check out their new ebook.
Oh, yeah.
How open source storage is disrupting the enterprise market. And it talks about how proprietary and cloud storage fall short of what you can do with ZFS, and why open source storage is a better development model for all storage systems. Plus, you know, the compatibility of the fact that, hey, if you make a ZFS pool, you can import it on FreeBSD or Illumos or Mac or Linux, and it just works. You're not locked into any provider or even any operating system. And how the IX System solutions take advantage of NVMe and NVDIMMs to give you very cutting-edge performance, and why businesses need unified data platforms, because, you know, it's much easier to protect and back up your data if it's all in one place, and, you know, it's much easier to deal with the data if it's on ZFS.
Yeah,
you get
for sure.
All this administrative awesomeness and the data protection from ZFS and checksums and so on.
Yeah, because these storage systems are basically used to house all your important data, and you might as well choose a good solution for that.
Do you really want to be locked into one particular vendor, or would you like to have something that's open source and well supported and available from your selection of operating systems and hardware vendors and software support vendors and so on?
Yeah, because these are your backup systems. These are your day-to-day storage systems that should not fail, or should have at least a way to, you know, give you tools and utilities to make it repair themselves or poke at it if the need is there. But they should be running reliably, and IX Systems can build you such a system. Just call them up and tell them what kind of open source solution you're looking for, or what kind of problems you're trying to solve with that server, and they will tell you the hardware combinations that they would recommend for you in case of, you know, if you want a certain number of CPUs or a certain performance in the I/O, or if you just want as many disks as possible in the system, they can build you these custom systems for your purpose, not just off the shelf.
Right, and because, you know, it'll be running ZFS, you're not stuck no matter what happens, whether it be to FreeBSD or IX Systems or whatever. Not that anything's going to happen to either of those, but you're not stuck. You can take that data and keep going forever. And, you know, ZFS, it's the last file system you're ever going to need.
Yes, and they also support conferences like BSDCan that we just attended 2 weeks ago. And they have their own version on their blog about how they were seeing the conference, because they were with a record number of people there. I think 20 people in total. They also had a table there showing their new M-series system. And they talked to people, of course, and sponsored the conference. So that was great. And their recap is listed on their company's blog, ixsystems.com/blog, where you can get their impressions about the conference. And it's nice to see that they had similar experiences that we got.
Yep.
So yeah, check out IX Systems. Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Yes.
Next story is interesting.
.com/BSD Now.
Yeah, excellent. Because our next story ties also into the storage space. We covered this a couple of, I think, a year ago or so.
Well, we covered the call for testing, but now this is actually merged in and will be part of FreeBSD 12.0 when it comes out in the next couple of months.
Yes, we're talking about the pNFS support in FreeBSD. So that's Parallel Network File System, implemented by Rick Macklem. So here's the commit message. There were a couple of follow-up commits with more smaller fixes, but this is basically what it's all about. So that was been developed in a development branch, and then was now merged into the official FreeBSD tree. So most people know about NFS, which is the network file system. You have a server, you have a client that accesses the storage on the server, and this one gives you the possibility to have a parallel setup so that people can get from their storage from multiple servers, and they synchronize that.
Right. So the general idea here is that you can have your load spread across multiple different NFS servers. So yeah, this basically it's what's known as NFS v4.1 or pNFS, and this code adds the server for it to FreeBSD. Although it is a large commit, it should not affect the behavior of any non-pNFS NFS server. There's a bunch of documentation
how to set that up,
and there'll be better documentation soon. This is a merge of all the kernel code. The userland and man page are they say coming soon, but it's been like 8 days, so I think those are actually in now. But a brief overview of how it works. A pNFS server separates the read-write operations from everything else that happens in NFS. So all the metadata operations, like creating a new file, updating the modified time on a file, and so on, those happen on the metadata server. And then this allows a pNFS service to be configured to what exceeds the limits of a single NFS server. So basically, by having one metadata server, where all the information about the files is, and then multiple mirrored data servers, when you go to read a file, you can say, read a 1 megabyte chunk from the first server and on the next 1 megabyte chunk from the second server, and pull twice as much over the network. Especially if you have link aggregation, where you have multiple network cards grouped together, suddenly you can actually use the extra bandwidth because you're coming from two different MAC addresses.
And that's significant, especially as your NFS server grows and the number of users.
Well, in particular, if you think, hey, I'm having this virtualization box with Beehive or Zen or whatever, and I'm going to host all my VM images on the NFS server. Well, if that data is spread across 4 or more NFS servers, now you can pull that data off much more quickly and more in parallel. And even if one of them goes down, you can still read all the data from all the VMs.
Yep, it's like your NFS RAID in a certain way.
Kind of. So NFS service consists of a single metadata server and some number of data servers, all of which are recent FreeBSD systems. Clients will mount by negotiating with the metadata server, just like with a regular single NFS server in the past. When a file is created, the metadata server creates a file tree identical to what you would get on a normal NFS server on the metadata server, except all of the regular files will actually be empty. As such, if you look at the exported tree of the MDS directly, you'll see that it's just a bunch of 0-byte files. Each of these files will have 2 extended attributes in the system attribute namespace. DS file, this extended attribute stores information about information that the metadata server needs to find the data files, and the attributes, which contains things like size, access time, etc. And so when you want to read the file, the metadata server basically tells you these blocks are over there and those blocks are over here, and go get it.
Yeah, very cool.
And it explains in more detail how that actually works. And then it talks a bit about the different configuration options you have. It says the critical bit of information returned by the FreeBSD MDS server is the IP address of each of the data servers. And that's how you get the flexible file layout that NFSV 4.1 is used and tightly coupled. So in the layout, this is also lets you have a file that says, for each file is basically for the server to know which parts of the file are on which data server.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks a bit more about it. So if you're interested in that or need basically high availability for your NFS, it's worth checking out.
Yeah, give it a test drive and report anything that you see, and or if you like it, then give it a thank you, because that's a huge amount of work to implement.
So next we have a very interesting one. Have you ever wondered why all of the names of the tools in Unix are really strange?
Yeah, we cannot comprehend.
Where did they come up with some of these names? Like, why is awk called awk? Well, actually, awk is named for the three people who invented it: Al Aho, Peter Weinberger, and Brian Kernighan. So they're three. The first letter of each of their last names is A-W-K. It's hard to say why it didn't end up getting called Aqua. Or
something like
awk
that.
is the one that actually was pronounceable, I guess, so maybe they picked that.
Or something, yeah.
grep actually comes from what the command in ed, the text editor, which you can buy a book about if you head over to Michael Lucas's website. But they backronymed it to mean Global Regular Expression Print. But is basically what it meant in ed was, I want to search the whole file for this regular expression and I want to print the result.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so G/ then your regular expression /P would give you the results. And then fgrep is just fixed grep. It allows you to search for a fixed string, which is faster than evaluating the other stuff. And then you have extended grep and so on. Cat actually is short for concatenate, which just means to, stick on the end of the last thing kind of thing. And there's that. But then GECOS, GECOS, is the name of the field in the password file that normally contains the user's real name. But that's actually the General Electronic Comprehensive Operating Supervisor, which is a little special.
There's a history there, I guess.
Yeah, that was the name of the Honeywell computer that came up with the idea of that field. And it actually has a specific format, so you can put like your office number and phone number, which made sense if you were at a university, which is where most of the Unixes were used originally.
Well, that would make sense. Nowadays, less so, but it's still there from the historic origins there.
And then we had ROF, the typesetting application, and then we ended up with NROF, which is new ROF, and TROF, which is the typesetter for new ROF.
Yeah, to make it even more confusing. But there's an easy one. There's TEE, which means the actual T, because if you have a pipe, then you can, plug into that one and get the information from that pipe.
Well, yes, and half of the flow will go straight across and half will be diverted. That's normal. And then BSS, that's the certain part of an executable file, and that's the block started by symbol.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And there's a longer explanation for what that means. What does RC stand for? Right? We have you have bash RC, shrc, etc rc.conf. Everything has an RC file, and it stands for runcom, which back in the old MIT CTSS era of 1965, that was how you did things, which was basically short for run commands.
Yep, and people also made up their own acronyms over time.
Yep.
For example, the next one.
Perl was the practical extraction and reporting language, or as told by some people, the pathologically eclectic rubbish lister.
Yep, I guess that's one of the nicer ones. Yeah, but Perl is there and has been around for a while as well, so people probably don't know what this means.
Yeah. If you happen to know some other interesting ones, you could write into feedback@bsdnow.tv and let us know. Or if you have some, if there's some tool you use frequently and are wondering what's the story with that, maybe we can answer that
in a future episode. So, time for the Beastie Bits this week, starting off with the RetroBSD, a Unix for microprocessors project. So this is over at retrobsd.org, and that explains what this project
is basically a port of BSD, not FreeBSD, BSD 2.11, which is the last version for the VAX, if I remember correctly. That's basically been ported forward for modern use. Specifically targeting things like the microchip PIC32. It can run with as little as 128 kilobytes of memory. And I think supports up to, or it fits in 512 kilobytes of flash.
That's been, if you have
if you need to, control some piece of hardware and, have a computer that's this big, it's very interesting. And, if you want to just see what it was like to run BSD in the 80s, then you can jump all over this.
That's your retro moment right there. But it's good to pick up that code base. And
there's also LiteBSD, LITE-BSD, which is the forward evolution of 4.4 BSD Lite for similar hardware.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more modern in that it supports like paging.
Okay, yeah. It comes in handy. I hear good things about it. And but again, if you have a very tight address space in like embedded systems, then you probably don't need that much. So that might be a good use for RetroBSD. Okay, next up. There was a big discussion, more or less, about OpenBSD, whether or not they break embargoes. In this particular case, the crack vulnerability. A couple of was it last year or a couple of?
I think it was early or late last year. Yeah, and so this was one of the vulnerabilities where OpenBSD got advanced notification and worked up the patch, but held off committing it. And there was a coordinated deadline, but then at the last minute, the deadline got pushed back, but OpenBSD got permission to commit it anyway, and people assumed that was OpenBSD breaking the embargo, but actually they have the entire email thread here if you're interested in seeing the actual details of what happened. And OpenBSD is making the case that they didn't actually break the embargo, and I think the emails back that up.
Yeah, with the timestamps there, you can find how everything evolved.
Okay, just more interestingly, we have an archive of Theo's old homepage from 1998 describing all of the computers that are in his basement. This is a copy of this from 1998. We need a new copy of this. Theo needs to do an inventory and let us know what's in his basement now. But back in 1998, he had some very interesting hardware, like a Sun SS2 with 28 megabytes of RAM and a 3.5 gigabyte hard drive and 2 monitors running SunOS.
Okay.
Well, at the time was called a Pentium 5, but actually was... Yeah.
I had one of those, 135. Yeah, that's the bus.
It was basically a Pentium 1, 133 megahertz with 64 megabytes of RAM and PCI, and a 17 gigabyte disk via an Adaptec 2940 SCSI controller.
Oh, those were the days.
And he had a 120 megahertz version with only 32 megs of RAM and 2 gigabytes of disk via similar controller. A 486 66 megahertz sounds very similar to the one I had, although mine had the Adaptec SCSI controller.
with terminators and proper cables and all that.
Yeah. A NEC Versa 2000 laptop with 16 megabytes of RAM and 500 megabytes of disk. Sun 4/400. A bunch of spare parts. 150 megahertz, 166 megahertz. An AMD Net 29K.
Wow.
Yeah, some
That's
Motorola's at
here.
25 and 16 megahertz. And a DEC at 166 megahertz.
Wow, cool.
Interesting old stuff.
Way back when, yeah, for people who want to delve into history and relive those days, that's a good way of sparking that. Okay, another story that we found is that Airport Extreme runs NetBSD. So this is over at Joshua Stein's blog. Writing 7 years ago, I hacked together some code to update my ecobee Wi-Fi thermostat temperature depending on whether I was home. While my newer ecobee thermostat was room occupancy sensors, they make this tracking automatic. Back then, I had to pull my Wi-Fi access point through SNMP to look for my phone's MAC address in its table of associated clients.
That is like the cleverest way to tell if you're home or not I have heard of. I've never would have thought of that. Just talk to your wireless and be like, is my phone's MAC address, do I have a DHCP lease from my phone right now?
Am I in the vicinity?
If my phone is not home, then the air conditioning doesn't need to be on.
Unless I forgot my phone at home.
Just boil to death.
Yeah. So, apparently Apple has removed the SNMP support from its Airport Extreme firmware some time ago. And since the macOS Airport utility is able to show the list of connected clients on each access point, they figured there must be a way to easily get that same information through something other than SNMP. And it talks about how to grab that information. And suddenly there is a familiar copyright statement and a NetBSD mooting prompt. And you can see.
It looks like it is actually NetBSD 6.0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can get the
compiled November 2017. That seems late for 6.0. Because they're working on NetBSD 9.0 right now, aren't they?
Yeah, there weren't many updates on in that section of Apple's hardware, if only that. And
right, it's just the compile date seems relatively new.
Yeah, maybe that was the last update they did or something. But it's definitely running NetBSD in that regard from the dmessage output. Okay, good to know in case you want to do some hacking on your Airport Extremes. Mm-hmm. Our last item is what Unix shell could have been. So this talks about that the shell or the bash or whatever you have is an excellent tool that saves people a huge amount of work. Being able to easily script complex jobs together is one of the best things. It does have some weaknesses, though, that I feel should be improved, though, and that basically talks about some of the advantages and drawbacks in that and what the current mess is in that. And yeah, that's a nice article to see what could be done in this area. The shell space, basically. So this is pretty much what we have as Beastie Bits for this week. And people have been always looking forward to the feedback and questions section. But as always, before we go into that one, we should mention our sponsor for that section, which is tarsnap.com, who will give you the online backups for truly paranoid people. You might think, I should back up a couple of files before my laptop dies, or if something horrible happens, I lose my hard disk or whatever. That's a good way to look at Tarsnap, because Tarsnap...
Yeah, it was built specifically because Colin wanted to back up his laptop while he was away at a conference, knowing that the Wi-Fi at the conference wasn't going to support syncing a lot of data. So he built an algorithm that would deduplicate segment all of his files into little chunks, deduplicate those and find the smallest possible differences, then compress those anyway, since a lot of what he was going to be doing was probably source code and so on and would compress well, and then encrypt and sign it and send it up, because it's going over the university's Wi-Fi, which the guest Wi-Fi at U Ottawa doesn't even have a password or anything, so it's probably not very encrypted.
Yeah, so he created that service and let other people now use it for a number of years now. So then people find out, well, how much does it cost? And how much do I have to pay each month? And there's a way to calculate that cost before signing up, because the Tarsnap utility is basically free to download, and it can do a dry run on your data, like a certain directory, and then it will spit out the number of unique data that it will be able to find after compressing it and deduplicating it, and that is the amount that you have to pay. So this is, for example, they have this in their FAQ. There's after deduplication and compression, there's 1.7 gigabytes available, and that multiplied by 25 cents, that lets you pay only 0.43 cents per month for that data.
Yeah, like I back up a directory full of all of my business data. So there's spreadsheets and documents and contracts and mostly all very compressible stuff. And it adds up to about a gig. So for the last, and it's grown a little bit but over the last 3 years, I've basically been paying about 25 cents a month. I think I'm up to 28 cents a month now because I have a bit more data than before.
Yeah, that's even less than the price of a soda. So you might as well spend a bit of money in having a good, reliable backup that's encrypted into...
I spend the price of a soda a year.
Yeah, that should be worth the trouble for setting this up. And it's quite easy to use. If you know Tarsnap, then, or Tar in particular, then Tarsnap is easy to use. They have good documentation online with examples, and it's a thing of like 5 or 10 minutes to set it all up.
Yep.
And yeah, basically just very nice and easy to get started doing backups.
Spend a couple minutes making sure you protect the key. You don't want anybody else to get the key, that's for sure. But also, because that would defeat the security of Tarsnap. But you have to not lose the key, because if you don't have the key, you can't get the files back. That's what protects your files from the bad guys. But it means it'll protect it from you too if you don't keep that key somewhere.
Yeah. And use a separate key for a separate backup, so we don't use the key for like 50 different backups. So use
because there's no way to
key for each of those.
There's no way to delete stuff from the cloud. So separate keys means when you want to delete some data, you just destroy the key. But yes, don't lose the key. I know someone from FreeBSD who had to pay a lot of money to some drive recovery experts to get their key back off a failed disk in order to download their backups and restore them.
Yeah.
They didn't, print it and laminate it and put it in a safe deposit box or something.
Back vault, somewhere safe that you can't lose it easily. So yeah, check out Tarsnap. The documentation is comprehensive, and it will make you rest much easier knowing that this backup of yours is secured in the cloud.
Yep.
Okay, up to feedback and questions. First of all, we need to tell you that you should send us a bit more feedback and questions, but because we're running low. If you have anything to ask about the show or about the BSD, send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv, so we'll cover it in a future episode.
Yes, also, a bunch of people owe us BSDCan trip reports, including you. If you went to BSDCan,
you know who you are.
If you went to BSDCan, share your experience with all of us, especially if it was your first time. And, what could we do better next year? What should people make sure not to miss when they go? What was it like being there for the first time? We found that the trip reports are the best way to convince new people to start coming, is to hear about how good somebody else's first time experience was. So, Dave, I'm looking at you. I want a trip report. But, lots of other people owe me trip reports. So get writing. Send them feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Yep, and then we'll share
But we did
that
get one email this morning. Jason wrote in and said, way back on an episode, I don't remember when, you guys talked about an appliance that runs FreeBSD that can be used to provide SSH access to other network services and could, do full session recordings of everything, and it's basically a security appliance. I think it even handled remote desktop and so on. Do you recall what that was? Yes, that
we
was
do.
the FUDO, F-U-D-O, like sudo, but with an F instead of an S. And that's made by Wheel Systems, by our friends Pavel and Marius and Conrad and a bunch of other people. And yes, it does. I can record remote desktop, VNC, HTTP and HTTPS, Oracle, MySQL, bunch of other protocols. And basically you stick it in front of your servers and allows you to monitor everything that the sysadmins and the contractors and anybody else that you allow access to the servers are doing. And it's a great way to keep track of what's going on in your network.
Yep, for security features, or if you're a bank or an insurance company that needs to keep records of all the things that were going on.
Yes, and Tuesday, June 19th, which was yesterday when we're recording this, was National FreeBSD Day.
Woohoo! Yeah, FreeBSD got 25 years old.
Yes.
Wow, that's a lot.
FreeBSD turned 25 yesterday, and lots of people were telling interesting stories about FreeBSD Day.
Yeah, how long they are using it or what they are using it for, and it's just great to read all of those.
Talking about starting using FreeBSD in 4.7 and talking about that. I have Jason here talking about how he discovered while hanging out with a bunch of friends and doing some network scanning stuff. People we met at FOSDEM doing interesting stuff.
IX Systems, of course, couldn't be pulled back to set up their horns and do a group picture. So that's nice to see. And they were also
our friend
happy to
Olivier
support.
Robert, who became a FreeBSD committer in 1995 after writing part of the original FAQ and rewriting it in SGML docbook. And then basically been using FreeBSD and 386BSD since 1992. So he was actually using one of the predecessors to FreeBSD.
Oh, wow. That's, that's even way before our time.
He's been using BSD for 26 years.
Yeah.
There's somebody had a screenshot of an old FreeBSD 5.2 machine with 4,000 days of uptime.
Oh, yeah. See, it's what we said all the time. It's reliable. It's stable. People should take a look or use it.
Yep.
And it's just great how many people posted stuff and, showed stickers and their personal experiences.
BSD has been around a long time, but it's still modern. It does a very good job of balancing being modern and having new stuff while being stable and not changing it from underneath you when you're trying to use it.
Yeah, I remember Henning Brauer's t-shirt, one of his t-shirts that says, "Old is not dead."
Yep.
So 25 years and counting. We are aiming for another 25 years at least.
Yep.
So, and if you want to join that, then there are ways to, not just listen to BSD Now, of course, but also contribute to the FreeBSD project or any BSD projects in particular to keep that, vital and healthy for the next 25 years.
Indeed. So, thank you for watching. We look forward to your feedback and your trip reports. The trip reports.
The ones you were supposed to send. Yeah. All right. Yeah. See you next week with more BSD Now.